What it do, E-World? Crisscrossing wires. And what I'm about to do is give you a good tip for soldering. Alright? Now my good tip for soldering is good tips. Literally. Good tips. Brand new or fresh soldering tips will help you solder so much better. Reason being is because a fresh tip, soldering tips are normally made out of copper or iron, and a really good tip has some weight to it, like this one. This is really heavy. Now there's a layer of nickel over top of this tip, and what happens over time in use is these tips get oxidized and corroded, and from the heat that nickel burns off. Now once this nickel burns off, this soldering iron will not be nearly as efficient as it was when it was brand new. When you had that brand new fresh tip in there, it soldered so great. The solder flowed so well. That's because that nickel coating that's on there allows the solder to flow easier. It makes a big difference. When your tip gets corroded like that, it is so hard to solder, and it's harder for the iron to transfer the heat to whatever you're soldering. Okay, not to mention when you're soldering very heavy gauge stuff like these really thick copper ring terminals or these connectors, anything that's heavy or thick, a thick gauge wire, it takes a lot of heat to solder on heavier gauge stuff. So you can't solder thick gauge wires and connectors with a lightweight iron. The tip itself has to have a lot of mass to it and density. When it has a lot of mass, it has the ability to hold the heat. If you have a lightweight, thin soldering iron, the heat is absorbed from the iron very quickly. The heat is then gone. Then you cannot, heat up whatever you're trying to solder. So have a really heavy duty soldering iron like this. It's not a high wattage. It doesn't have to be high wattage. It needs to be heavy. Like I said, and this is 80 watts. 80 watts is plenty enough power to solder with, but because the element and the tip is heavy, it holds the heat. These tips go way down in there, and if I hit you in your head with this iron, I probably can bust your head to the white meat. Alright, so I see people trying to solder with those trigger instant soldering irons just because they're 300 watts. They think that's good. No, they can't hold the heat. They are terrible for soldering heavy gauge wires and connectors. You need a heavy duty iron like this one. Alright, that you also have to keep your tip tinned. Alright, looking nice and shiny with a coating of solder on it. You also should have a little wet sponge or a napkin, something to clean your tip with as you're soldering. Alright, not only that, you can also help your soldering iron out by heating up whatever you're trying to solder before you start soldering. Like sometimes I'll take my heat gun and I'll heat that connector up. Don't burn up whatever you're trying to solder, but heat it up. Heat it up, let it be warm already. That way your soldering iron doesn't have to do a lot of extra work. Not only that, use some flux. Flux is always going to help solder flow. So put flux on whatever you're soldering, alright? These tips will help you, trust me. Also, when you're not soldering, the time between, unplug your iron. Your iron just sitting there hot, especially irons like this, that kills these tips quicker. So just, try to prolong the life of your tip by taking care of it. I mean, no matter how good you do, they're going to wear out and you have to replace them. But you always got to keep a fresh tip, especially if you're getting ready to solder something really important and you need it performing its best. So I'm getting ready to do power wires and connectors. I need my iron working its best. Going to put some fresh tips in it. So that's my tip for soldering. Good tips.